Hebert of the Department of Diplomacy and World Affairs. I'm also the faculty liaison for the volunteer opportunities in Rwanda. I'm really happy to see such a great crowd, especially for a Wednesday at 7 o'clock. I'm excited to see that there's a lot of interest around the Oxy and Rwanda programs. It's certainly something that I'm quite passionate about, largely because of the enthusiasm of the great participants, because of their hard work and dedication and their ability to thrive under challenging circumstances, that I'm really excited about the future of the program. I'm just going to talk for a little bit and then I'm going to turn things over to the students, but just to give you a little bit of context. One of the things that I'm most often asked when people hear about Oxy and Rwanda is why Rwanda? Especially since I'm more known for my work on gender and human rights in Southern Africa and Southeast Asia. Well, probably not surprisingly, my interest in Rwanda dates back to April 1994 and the genocide in Rwanda, where in the space of just around 100 days, 800,000 people were killed, while essentially powerful states like the U.S. stood by. There was a UN peacekeeping force on the ground there to monitor a peace agreement between the Hutu-led government in Rwanda and a Tutsi-led rebel force that had been living in exile in Uganda that had, the two sides had agreed to form a power-sharing government. But then the Hutu-led government, extremists in the government decided they weren't willing to give up power and began to systematically exterminate Tutsis as well as moderate Hutus. Again, the reaction of the Security Council was to reduce the size of that peacekeeping force, leaving the population to fend for its own. I was actually living in South Africa at the time that the genocide began. And so it's kind of this unique situation. I'm in a country that's undergoing this dramatic transformation while watching another country essentially falling apart. You hear a lot, even to this day, there are political leaders who say they didn't really understand what was happening in Rwanda. Well, I was in South Africa. I can imagine, I'm sitting in my living room in Johannesburg watching CNN International in the days leading up to the genocide. And there were reports of machetes being stockpiled and of Tutsis being targeted. And I've talked before to some of my students about one of the things that is really striking to me is that many of the reports that were coming out in the news at the time were focused not on the slaughter of humans, but on the fact that there were Western environmental groups that were trying to figure out how to evacuate the mountain gorillas that inhabit the Buffalo National Park. Now, I'm an animal lover. I actually had, once-in-a-lifetime experience to go trekking and see the gorillas. But it's always really bothered me that these groups were willing to think about how to allocate their resources to airlift gorillas out. And they were talking about airlifting, which certainly would not have been a cheap or easy feat. Meanwhile, there's really no discussion about how to evacuate people in order to save them. And so the really indifference of external actors stayed with me, especially when the full scale of the atrocities that had been committed were known. And so from that time on, I've been closely following developments in Rwanda, first as more of an average observer of international affairs, and then as an international human rights scholar. And to this day, Rwanda features in a lot of my classes. My international organizations classes next week, we are going to be reading Michael Barnett's book, Eyewitness to Genocide, and watching the documentary Ghosts of Rwanda, and talking about how UN organizational culture essentially contributed to the failures in Rwanda. Now, even though I've been following developments in Rwanda now for 16 years, it really wasn't until last year that I had the chance to go to the country because I've been working on different projects. But thanks to the John Park Young Fund, I was able to start a new project focusing on Rwanda, and I decided to use that experience to try to find a way to create opportunities for Oxy students for research and service. And there's a lot of great resources on campus in terms of funding students to do independent research projects focusing on the domestic or international realm. The CCBL, in terms of community-based learning, is great in terms of creating local service opportunities. But it's really quite challenging for students to find opportunities to engage in academically informed service at the international level. And so with the Young Fund, it created an opportunity for DWA to think kind of creatively about how to fill gaps in kind of the opportunities available for students. And Rwanda, I've always, even before I went there, I always thought it was kind of an ideal place for students for a lot of reasons. Safety is one issue. I mean, we think of Rwanda in terms of one of the most horrific periods of history in the 20th century. But today, it's actually one of the safest places to be in all of Africa. In large part because of the genocide, the government simply doesn't tolerate crime and violence. It's also a very small country, roughly the size of about Maryland. And it has a pretty good road and transportation system, which makes it fairly easy to get to even the most remote areas. But also because of the complicated history in the country, it offers so many opportunities for students, not just DWA, but opportunities for students from film and media studies, from psychology, sociology, economics, even mathematics and physics, given that the government has really been focusing on technological innovation as a way of recovery. So for all of those reasons, I thought it was a good idea, and then actually being there, for me, was a very kind of emotional experience that I thought that students would really connect with the opportunity. It is a country where, it's still permeated with the experience of genocide 16 years later, but it's also a very forward-looking country. And so to have the opportunity to go there, to go to the genocide memorials, to talk to survivors, but also to talk to average community members about how they are kind of moving forward, for me, I know it was a transformational experience. And I wanted that kind of experience to be available to students. So building on my contacts, specifically one particular contact who has a connection to Oxy through a friend, as well as the support of the John Park Young Fund, 6 students were able to go to Rwanda this summer. 3 of the students are currently based at the UN and couldn't be here. I believe that they shared their reflections on their experiences with NP, and she'll in turn share them with you. But of these students, Sky Manjin, a politics major, held workshops with community associations and interfaith organizations focusing on capacity building and strategic planning. Amy McDonough and Stephanie Chin, who are both DWA majors, held workshops on public health issues, on issues such as alcohol abuse, nutrition, HIV/AIDS. Professor Brody Fox specifically recommended 3 students for their film and media studies skills. Julia Bleckner, a DWA major, and Nelson Melgar, a film and Spanish studies major, worked together and held workshops on all facets of filmmaking. And then, as you can tell from the amazing pictures, Anahid Yajin, who is a ECLS student, she held workshops on photography. What's important to note about all of these opportunities is that they were very much focused not on a traditional notion of charity, but on capacity building, where the idea was that people would participate in the workshops and then go back to their communities and share their information. And from what I've heard in terms of talking to the students who've stayed in touch with people, that's exactly what's been happening, and so it's really exciting. Now, not everything in Rwanda went as anticipated, although for anyone who's lived or worked in Africa, that's not at all surprising. But this group of students was really amazing. Every one of them proved to be incredibly self-motivated and creative and able to adapt to unexpected circumstances. And so I was really fortunate to have them, if you will, as kind of pioneers for the program. And I'm really excited that they have the opportunity to share with you their reflections on their work in Rwanda. I'm actually going to turn things over to Anahid. I'll come back at the end and talk about future opportunities for students, and there will be plenty of time for any questions you might have for me or the students. But I do want to leave plenty of time